where not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. From WBRN Radio and traveling on the Boston Red Network, the episode is Friday Java on the 14th of February 2020. Happy Valentine's Day, a day created by the commercial greeting card industry. I was listening the other day to, I don't recall, I think it was on BBC, about small independent greeting card companies and their contribution. These were some people that had started one, and writers and illustrators, etc., and how the greeting card business has changed. At one time, we had the larger Walmart, I think of there, and American Greeting. Now you have all kinds of cards out there, and you can make your own or whatever you want to do, period, and send it out. So that has changed. A number of items I want to bring you up to date on. The COVID-19 virus, as it is now called, is up to 64,000 cases. Now, this is only a predictive number from the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. And over 200 and whatever it is, don't have it right here, people that have died, and that number will also go up over time. All of these numbers will go up on one cruise ship alone. There are over 200 plus people that have been, it has been determined, I should say, that they have the coronavirus. That's whatever prince is there, it's docked off of Okinawa in Japan, and one other cruise ship has docked in Cambodia, and the leader of Cambodia met it, and the people were able to depart, or decamp, or whatever you want to call, on this Prince's liner that's off of Japan. Some of the elderly people are being evacuated from it, and as of course people would get sick, they would evacuate those people. The problem in a cruise ship is when you have thousands of people confined to their cabins, and these are basically elderly people because it's expensive to go on a cruise for people that have been on a cruise liner, particularly there. These are very large floating cities, basically speaking, that there are all kinds of activities from swimming to shuffleboard. I don't know if they have shuffleboard anymore, but various kinds of activities, and of course food is there, and very good food, lobster, etc., etc. And the crews are providing that with masks and with gloves on, and they put the food at the cabins and stand back and move about their business. Now, one lady they have been interviewing is an author. I forget what her name is. I think her last name is Gable. She'd actually written a novel about a cruise ship, and she had been on that cruise ship as for her novel. I'll have to get a novel. But now she can write a second novel about a cruise ship and the COVID-19 virus. Anyway, nonetheless, she's there, and she's in her 70s, and her husband also, as far as we know, the last report we heard from her, she was still okay. But some other people were having difficulties, and evidently they had a large enough cabin that there's a balcony, so they can open the door and get some fresh air. Now, according to the cruise ship operators, they are circulating air, but not recirculating air, and that is one of the downsides for a ship. Now, the more convenient situation would be to dock that ship and have some sort of mechanism where they would start offloading people and testing them as they offload them and taking them to some facility, or facilities, probably facilities, and house them in those facilities. But evidently the Japanese healthcare ministry has decided they would not do that in a particular situation. So this is one of the things positive will come out of this, is how healthcare systems are upgraded to handle these types of epidemics and pandemics, etc. In China, several party officials have been sacked in Yuan area there, so they're out of a job. And also looking at the system, how do one upgrade the system in terms of various medical facilities and supplies. Now, when you start talking about a country like China with over 1 billion people, you're only going to have X number of masks. You're not going to have masks for 1 billion people immediately available there. But now you can bet that the Chinese authorities will put more emphasis into producing these masks. They are the largest producer, incidentally, in the world now. There are places in North America, particularly in the U.S., that produce masks of better quality and more expensive. We tried wearing a mask around the other day, and it was interesting that we got from a medical facility, and I noticed that after wearing this mask that they were not all that durable. Now, we have other kinds of masks that we have used in the past for working on computer servers, and we still have some of those left. I don't know how many years they've been around, but they are much more firmer, and the idea of those were to keep the dust out of you, which basically these masks that you get, paper type masks. I'll try to get a picture up with one of these masks on and my gloves for effects. But anyway, this is basically where things are with that particular situation. The Attorney General Barr was on ABC talking about the tweets by DJ Trump, the president, and that it was causing him problems in terms of performance of his job. A lot of pressure on Barr, because Barr has been seen as a yes person in the Justice Department since the investigation by Mr. Mueller. And that continues on there. How can that happen? And this is the sentencing of Roger Dorger Stone. And, of course, Stone has been around for a long time, since Tricky Dick, as a trickster and a Republican operative, a close associate of D.J. Trump. And the recommended sentencing guidelines, I think they recommended up to 9 years. Now, it is not unusual for federal prosecutors to recommend sentences. It's all up to the judge. Sometimes the judge will go along with the sentencing and there's also a guideline. I think this may be above the guideline for the type of charge he's convicted of. But at the same time, the judge can look at the guideline and can take the prosecutor's recommendation or lessen the amount of time served or increase the amount of time. That's up to Judge Jackson there. And we'll see where that turns out. But this is not that unusual for something like this to happen. What is unusual is that usually the Department of Justice, when prosecutors decide that it would be the local U.S. Attorney's Office, or in this case in Washington, career prosecutors, etc., usually that would stand at least till they have their day in court. And there they'll work out the sentencing of Stone. Now, the ultimate situation is that D.J. Trump can pardon Stone, and Stone would walk out of prison the next day or two. As quickly he'd walk in and walk out, and maybe not even walk in. I'm not sure about that guideline, but it would be a very quick transition for him. He would go to a processing center, and he would really not be processed because he would be pardoned, and he'd go home. So that's probably what will happen in this case anyway. So it's one of those unfortunate situations that D.J. Trump has made another mistake and exacerbated a problem that he really did not need. It's sort of like the Ukraine situation. Ukraine not being a nation on the radar of various people, but created a contrivancy and ended up in the impeachment process. Now, has that damaged D.J. Trump? We'll have some numbers here in a minute, but no, not his approval ratings. Approval ratings have basically stayed the same, period. And on the other side of the coin, we have the contest for the Democratic presidential nomination. It moves on. We've moved out of Georgia, Iowa, and moved on to New Hampshire, and now we said bye-bye New Hampshire. Incidentally, we'll have a special program on New Hampshire, and on the open source report, we'll have a report on the Iowa caucus. What went wrong there? What about the Georgia Saltware Company, which is called Shadow? There's some MIT professors, incidentally, that have out a report on Nevada, and we'll talk about Nevada also. But on the open source report, and we'll also talk about open source software. It's becoming more and more of an issue that the code has to be looked at. When you have proprietary code, that is a problem. And that is one of the reasons, if you say have iPhone or Apple products, Mac products, etc., that is a proprietary system, and it causes all kinds of problems. So we'll talk more about that on the open source report. On Numbers Man, another program in the family of programs we have at WBRN and the Boston Red Network, we talk about the economy from the macro point of view, and we have a hearing. Actually, there were two hearings from Chairman Powell. We have the one before the House. We'll have a little bit of that and some of the Q&A from the House of Representatives. We usually like to also get Q&A from reporters. We'll look for that. That'll be next few days. We'll get that one up. And also Dr. Thomas Petit, the person that the French economist that wrote Capital. Now he's out with a new book, Capital and Ideology. And we'll get a review up on that as soon as possible. I haven't had an opportunity to read it, but he is now reporting it. So we'll get to our friends from the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. And we always honor Heber Hire, who was killed by white supremacists in downtown Charlottesville. This is the Crystal Ball. That's Larry Sabato's shop. This time around, we have Kyle Klondike here, and Miles Coleman are writing for this particular issue of the Crystal Ball. And we have other articles here. We have E.J. Dion. We'll get to E.J. Dion and his article on Amy Klobuchar. In fact, from the LA Times, also the Washington Post goes there. It's all about Amy and Amy's third place finish in New Hampshire, where she bested both our Senator Elizabeth Warren and also Joe Lunchbox Biden, who left town early, heading on to South Carolina in better climatic conditions, no doubt about that. And we'll talk a little about the composition in these states, but let's firstly get to the Crystal Ball, and we won't obviously read the whole article, but we will talk a little bit about it. The caption here is, for Sanders, New Hampshire was a glass both half full and half empty. The battle is breaking in his favor, even as his own performance hasn't been that strong. Well, when you have a field of candidates as they have now, you're not going to have a decisive winner, period. And the key points here, there were mixed signals for Bernie Sanders' narrow victory in New Hampshire. But for now, he is supplanted. He has supplanted Joe Lunchbox Biden as a weak front runner for the nomination. Well, he's not a weak front runner. He's not actually, I would say, a front runner. We haven't had enough contests yet to start talking about that. Overall, though, the race remains very uncertain as the scene shifts to more diverse states of Nevada and South Carolina. Of course, South Carolina being a state that the Democratic Party there is made up, a majority of people are followers of O.J. Simpson. And Nevada also has people of color there, Latinos, Asians in Nevada, and of course African Americans. So all the people are there, and they have rural voters, so they have a mixture of voters. And let's go down here. Center-left candidates got substantially more support than, and this is a misnomer here. The candidates were not center-left candidates, than progressive ones in New Hampshire. Well, it's how you define progressives are usually center-left. And it has been reported that Bernie Sanders labels himself a Democratic Socialist. What's a Democratic Socialist? In the rest of the world, he'd just be a Social Democrat. And that would be the end of that right there. But the center-left vote split in such a way that Sanders was able to win. Pete had slightly more delegates so far. That's a little Petey there. But the competition for little Petey in New Hampshire was Amy Klobuchar. She was closing fast, just as little Petey moved out in the last few days. Bernie was ahead in some polls, and we'll get to that in a minute, by as much as 10 points. And the Emerson polling people pointed out that little Petey was in the margin of error. So in the wake of his victory in New Hampshire primary, Bernie Sanders seemed to some like an unstoppable front runner. That's fiction there. To others, he seemed like a spent force. There is evidence backing up both arguments. Is a testament to the uncertainty of the Democratic race following the first in the nation primary. The argument for Sanders, not only that he won New Hampshire, but also that the person who seemed throughout 2019 like the biggest obstacle to him winning the nomination, Joe Lunchbox Biden, sputtered to a pitiful, they call it, fifth place finish. Failing to crack the double digits, Sanders' other top rival, our own Elizabeth Warren, is arguably in even worse shape than Bernie, as Biden. At least Biden can try to make up some lost ground in Nevada and also particularly in South Carolina, where he hopes that the state's majority African-American electorate can resuscitate his fledgling campaign. Warren has no such rebound. Iowa and New Hampshire could or should have been a good states for her, but she did okay in the former and terribly in the latter. Meanwhile, little Petey probably would have won both Iowa, which he narrowly carried in terms of delegates over Bernie, despite Sanders receiving more votes. Now that's the problem with Iowa. Incidentally, in Iowa, the Democratic chair there has quit. Amy Klobuchar threw in the towel. She threw in the towel after her mediocre fifth place finish in the Hawkeye State. Said Klobuchar used a strong debate performance Friday night as a springboard into a solid third place in New Hampshire. And if she'd have had a few more days, she would have probably been very, very close to a little Petey, and maybe past little Petey. Period. Finishing close to Sanders and little Petey in first and second, then to Warren and Biden in fourth. Well, Warren has had some problems since before the Iowa caucuses. She had a good organization in Iowa, but at the same time, she was in a situation having to compete against Bernie Sanders, who had won Iowa and also had a very good organization there, and she made some strategic missteps, and those didn't come out too well. Sanders benefits from the alignment of rivals, while Sanders has not demonstrated widespread appeal to African Americans, but that is better since the campaign he had with Killer Mike. I guess Killer Mike, the last I heard of Killer, he was working for the NRA, a backbone, a demographic of the Democratic Party that's not really been heard from yet. Buttigieg and Klobuchar are significantly weaker amongst, of course, African American voters than Sanders, at least now and will be in the future. Sanders was threatened by a candidate who could dominate the African American vote. That's Joe Lunchbox Biden. Hypothetically still could, but seen likelier now that the African American vote might splinter. Well, in South Carolina, Tom Steyer is doing very well, very good. They go to Michigan State here, and Matt Grossman argued Tuesday night. Bernie won in both his main national competitors. Biden and his ideological fraction of competitor Warren lost badly. Well, they did in fact do that, but the field remains too muddled for him to see a full assault. Note, though, the pro-Sanders argument is we just made above largely focused on the challenges of his rivals as opposed to his own performance. No doubt about that. While it's unfair to Sanders to measure him by 60% share in a head-on contest with Hillary the Monster Clinton, his 26% plurality is in a much larger field, put him a few points behind his pre-election polling average in New Hampshire, but this was less than the half his share from 4 years ago. He turned in weak performances even as Warren sunk. But Warren wasn't the, and this is important to make, was not the principal player in this. Elizabeth Warren was getting a bad press, and so was actually Bernie. What the press focused on were the so-called moderate Democrats. When they started out, it was Joe Lunchbox Biden. And then when they went, it became in Iowa Little Petey. The focus was on Little Petey from South Bend, otherwise known as South Bend, or CIA Pete. And finally, after the debate, there's a number of debates, they started to look a little bit at Amy Klobuchar. That was not known. And then, of course, after her debate performance in New Hampshire, people started moving towards her. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, particularly in Nevada. If a Warren were to drop out, we could assume Sanders would disproportionately benefit. Sanders did great amongst young voters and liberals, not necessarily with other kinds of voters. Well, he had done well amongst working class voters. While the turnout was up from 2016, demographics and turnout were not really favorable to Bernie Sanders. A point we made, calling into question his claim that he could expand the electorate in favor of both a primary and general election setting. As Grossman added at the end of the tweet quoted above, media coverage does not seem likely to help him expand his coalition. No doubt about it, things like this do not help him out. It makes some sense to compare this race to 2016 GOP contest, at least in the sense that both featured large field in New Hampshire primary winner who party elites really didn't like, DJ Trump. Trump got 35% in New Hampshire 4 years ago, finishing about 20 points ahead of the second place finisher John Kirsch, who was a former governor of Ohio. Sanders' win was much more of a nail-biter, and he only got 26% of the vote, historically a weak showing for the granite state winner. Trump benefited from GOP nominating rules, so it made it easy for him, for a plurality of the winners to accumulate delegates early in the process. For instance, Trump followed up New Hampshire's win by taking just 32% in South Carolina, but he won 100% of delegates. The uniform Democratic rule, which requires at least 15% support to be included in proportional allocation, can distribute the delegates much more evenly. Sanders tied with Buttigieg in delegates in New Hampshire, and upstart former mayor actually led what they call a veteran senator by two there. Biden clearly took a hit in Iowa, and in New Hampshire only exacerbated his problems. National polling, where Biden almost always leads, has moved against him. Sanders has topped some spots, and then here comes Bloomberg. And DJ Trump was tweeting about Bloomberg. I didn't know Bloomberg was only 5'4", but Bloomberg replied to him, and Bloomberg's in New York, and I mean, it's a little bit different situation there. The height of a person is from the chin to the top of the head. Taking a hit on DJ Trump, and said his friends laugh at him as a buffoon. Now, for Bloomberg, he's at 7.5 in the 538 national polling average, while Biden is down that same exact total of 7.5. It doesn't really matter very much in a big field. Bloomberg, let's see here, particularly as one notes the growth of Bloomberg amongst African American voters in polling crosstabs, while Biden slips among the same demographic. Honestly, it may have been current numbers are catching Biden only in the midst of an ongoing free fall, they call it. And the situation is these characters are now poised to eat a Joe Lunchbox Biden alive. Telling quote, this is from Quentin James, who runs a PAC that backs African American candidates. African American voters are starting to leave him now. A big reason lots of African American voters were with Biden is they thought he was the best person to beat DJ Trump, and so did DJ Trump. And they thought one reason for that is that he had the support of European voters. Now they've seen he has done so poorly with European voters, but so did Barack Obama. Not as poorly, period. He can no longer look like the electability candidate, or as Theodore Johnson, an expert on African American voting patterns, put it, for a bloc whose top priority is defeating the president. Electoral pragmatism necessarily lose a day. African voters may have been attracted to Biden out of pragmatism, and they could move in sizable numbers to Bloomberg. And they mentioned Petey. That's not going to happen. Amy Klobuchar, that the same kind of pragmatism rooted in belief held at least some Democrats that Sanders is too far to the left. And this is something you're going to see this at the Crystal Ball. They have never liked Bernie Sanders nor any progressive. They're a middle of the road place. We include them
to get the middle of the road perspective. How does this sort out? Sanders has replaced Biden as a weak front runner. Well, he's not actually a front runner, but it's a tenuous situation, no doubt about that. Could boost his case with a strong showing in the next contest. Nevada. Well, Nevada is Nevada, and so is South Carolina. But when you go into Super Tuesday, that is really where all the marbles are. There would be another debate next week, and Bloomberg may be on stage. He probably would prefer not be given this strategy of carpet bombing the airwaves while fencing off increased negative coverage. But it's early in the campaign. This is about stop and frisk, something that he championed. And this is something the press brings in. Now, Andrew Yang is gone. Deval Patrick is gone. Didn't matter. Nor did it matter for Michael Bennett. They were just placeholders. Tom Steyer enters the mix now. He hardly registered in Iowa and New Hampshire, but he had decent polling numbers in Nevada and in South Carolina. Well, the situation is he could come up. A close look throughout much of the night. Sanders maintained a slim lead, while Petey came tantalizing close to surmounting. Perhaps not surprising, Sanders tends to run best in the rural counties that touch his state of Vermont. He carried all but a handful of towns bordering Vermont. His best county was Cheshire in the southwest corner of the state. And he also carried the major areas there of the Granite State towns that border Massachusetts. She took 8%, tick down of her statewide share. Instead, much of Greater Boston, it was Buttigieg got that. Those are well off suburban locations. And we head down here. So basically what you had, and this is the problem Barack Obama had, was a little bit different. In much of New Hampshire, the rural areas, that sort of thing, the monster ended up winning that contest because of the way New Hampshire was laid out. Now, they also note here the Associated Press, Fox News, first time it came up, Votecast, which is essentially an alternative to exit polling, shows Iowa and New Hampshire Votecast results based on whether respondents did or did not have a degree, as polling suggests. Bernie Sanders was strongest with voters who did not have a degree. I talk about college degrees here. Warren and Amy Klobuchar were strongest with those who did. Well, as you get into some of these states, you won't find as many. The result in the 20 most highly educated towns bear this out, noting that Mayor Petey ran just a tiny bit ahead of his statewide share in these locations, while Klobuchar ran a little ahead and Sanders a little behind. Well, it doesn't matter that much. And let's see, this is based on most recent U.S. American Community Survey, estimate of college four-year attainment. Statewide, 36% have a degree, a BA degree or higher, and compared to 63% in this group. New Hampshire primary's best educated towns they talk about would have carried those 20 educated towns by 14.5% over Hillary Clinton. Dartford College is the most highly educated municipality in Hanover. In the state, 81% of its residents over 25 hold a college degree. Buttigieg carried this Ivy League area, but Sanders tends to dominate in towns that have house public universities. A little bit different there. After disappointing turnout in Iowa, Democrats beat a turnout. And this is one of the big questions we had about in terms of turnout. About 300,000 in New Hampshire. Although that might be quite as impressive as it seemed once we take population growing, and New Hampshire has grown in population. By the way, DJ Trump was also running in New Hampshire. He got 84% of the vote, but he had nothing to get it with. Let's see, eschewing nominee's performance was at the higher end of the range enjoyed by four presidents: Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Barack Obama, who consistently showed has very solid support from his own party. Going into the primary, you had Mayor Petey, Klobuchar, and Biden were competing for supremacy of the moderate lane, while you had Bernie and Elizabeth Warren tailoring their campaign to more progressive-minded voters. Sanders ultimately prevailed with 26% of this very fractured field. 53% of Tuesday's vote went to more center. And these are just centrist candidates, primarily there. Amy Klobuchar is a little more, I guess you'd say, center-left. The other two are not. Compared to 35% for the progressive candidates here, and this is delegate math. We'll skip that because really there was nothing here. In Iowa, well, Iowa is very dodgy. The Associated Press has not even called that. Now updated, Buttigieg had a slight lead in Delaware County in Iowa, but really not a lot there. Of parties, presidential politics, and the quadrennium orgy. Anyway, imagine the convention of clowns meant to design an amazing, crazy quilt schedule to nominate a president. The incoherent organization of primaries, caucuses, the mad dash of candidates. This is the American way. Most places have a 90-day situation. That's it. A good-sized piece of the problem could be labeled Iowa and New Hampshire. These two states seem to assume that the Constitution is guaranteed that they should go first, but a close reading of the text finds no such clause. New Hampshire led all to primary initially in 1920. Little history, and arguably been very influential since 1952, when it played a role in both the decision of President Truman not to seek re-election to Dwight Eisenhower's successful quest for the GOP nomination. New Hampshire reprised its 1952 incumbent toppling when the Minnesota Senator, the late Eugene McCarthy. And McCarthy came with a few percentage points of defeating LBJ, leading in part to LBJ's decision shortly thereafter not to seek another term. The Iowa caucus have only played a role since 1968, and its true national debut came in 1972 when the late George McGovern scored well there on his way to surprise ill-fated nomination there. Boy, these people still don't like him. And the Iowa caucus preferred a little-known governor named Jimmy Carter from Georgia to the Democratic nomination and the presidency, assisted also by Carter's subsequent narrow victory in New Hampshire. Carter received less than 30% of the vote, but in a crowded Democratic field, he prevailed. There's a lot more to winning the nomination than one would think. Congress has some power to interview in state-based, party-centric nomination process, yet the federal legislation would be highly unlikely to step in, no doubt about that. The parties themselves will have to deal with New Hampshire and particularly with Iowa as to what they do. Now, a little bit here in the beginning in March and April, and to the August party conventions, then into Labor Day, and that's when it kicks off the general election. In most places, you have like a somewhere between 30 and 90-day campaign, and that's the end of it right there. And some more things here. Regional primaries, I'm not so sure about that. The closest they have to a regional primary is on Super Tuesday, but that's not regional. You have California, Texas, all the big ones in there, even Minnesota and various other states are in there. California used to be one of the last ones, if you recall. Robert Kennedy, when he made his California victory, and he was on to Indiana. Now I'm not sure when Indiana comes in there. We don't think much of it. Now, we could achieve the best of both worlds by adding a second lottery on January 1st. The names of all states with 4 or fewer House of Representatives. Anyway, this is another scheme right here that could come up, and how it could be done here. Regional lottery plan would achieve many good things simultaneously. First election process would make little sense. The election campaigns should be short and focused to relieve both candidates and voters. Well, a lot of that is for the press New Hampshire has only been justly known, and for this only comes about by putting the politics of the nomination election in a proper place, the U.S. Constitution. Well, getting anything into the U.S. Constitution is a very, very difficult process, so you shouldn't be surprised at that. Let's move on here. We'll move to the LA Times and a little bit of all this about Amy, and we'll get to some polling. Anyway, this is the LA Times. Amy Klobuchar's prize finish faces big challenges keeping her momentum alive. No doubt about that. She's smiling and grinning here. But she'll do that. This is Dateline, Manchester, New Hampshire. Surprisingly strong third place is showing in New Hampshire's primary, catapulted the long shot candidate into the top tier, where she is in the tier. A little known, this is the big thing, little known Minnesota senator, counted out and mired at the bottom of the polls for months, managed to beat far more prominent politicians. A reckoning is coming. Now, it's actually not coming, because in South Carolina she's not very well known, and not known also in Nevada. The next two states that vote there, in contrast with the overwhelmingly European electorate for Iowa and New Hampshire. That poses a challenge for Amy Klobuchar, a former prosecutor from a mostly European state who has been seeing little support of people of color. Well, she hasn't had a chance to get much in terms of people of color in her home state. A very small population of people of color, most centered in the Twin Cities. So a little bit different there. She benefited in New Hampshire from support of the state's many European college graduates, especially women. As according to exit polls, yet in Nevada and South Carolina, you don't have such a high proportion of college graduates. That's more like the nation. Following two battleground states, more than a dozen states vote on Super Tuesday, including California, challenge for all candidates except for Mr. Bloomberg, but certainly for Klobuchar, who lacks the deep pockets and multi-state infrastructure of some of the rivals. And of course, Bernie is already organized in California. She's likely to face heightened attention to her record. Well, they're already talking about her record in terms of the Edwards case and the imprisonment of a young man that has basically been proven he didn't do it, Mr. Burrell. But there's no clear path to get Mr. Burrell out of jail or get him a new trial. He had a second trial. This is that, and what happened was Amy Klobuchar is a victim as much as Kamala Harris, both a prosecutor, and to a certain extent Joe Biden, because Joe Biden was there, and Bill Clinton, and when they passed the big crime bill, using the same tactics, the so-called broken window theory, that put many African Americans and Latinos in jail for these very long sentences, the war on drugs, etc. Those were the talking points when she ran for state's attorney there in Minnesota, and was congratulated for putting people away. A lot of people got on that bandwagon. I recall even when Jesse Jackson was saying he had a double take walking at that time when young African Americans were out on the street. Well, that was just something he did for political purposes on the south side of Chicago. But nonetheless, that was a theme in the country. And that came out of 1968 and Tricky Dicky, and later Reagan's DARE program, and this emphasis was on crack cocaine. And I remember Reagan was giving a speech at the White House, had some crack cocaine, or rock cocaine, what do you want to call it, and he disappeared. We don't know who got that crack, but anyway, the whole situation is this was an atmosphere, and the atmosphere still goes on today. Big debates. Old stop and frisk Bloomberg is caught up in the same thing, and he obviously in New York as mayor was a little different from Amy Klobuchar being a state's attorney. Now, state's attorney or prosecutor, what do you want to call them, they're elected usually on being tough on crime or some case that they have, and they will have a few cases. That's the same way they do it in Los Angeles. And sometimes the district attorney himself will actually, or herself, will actually come into court and try the case. That's usually not the case. I don't recall how many cases Amy Klobuchar tried, but she is the prosecutor that is there now. Fortunately for her, the publicity around this case, the Edwards girl, little girl doing her homework, shot and killed, unfortunately, 11 years old. Very sad case there. Number of characters involved in it, and a number of jailhouse snitches, the typical situation. Very dodgy, no physical evidence, fingerprints, DNA, etc. Just a shot in the dark, quite literally. But at that time, that was all that was needed. Many people were put into jail just based upon what some jailhouse snitch said or what a lineup said. Very, very dodgy evidence there. So when you look at this whole situation, the broken window is motivated by systemic racism. That's what Amy Klobuchar needs to address. And that is still in the system today. The law and order people, DJ Trump, lock them up. And this is where it's kind of a zero sum. Running against DJ Trump, she's not have any problem, because DJ Trump had his infamous trial in Manhattan there. Central Park 5. 5 people there, African American. I think one Latino was in there. And they were totally innocent. They were exonerated by DNA. But yet Trump has never admitted that. So this is part of a bigger system and has to be explained to the people as what it was. Now, Bloomberg was a little bit different. He went around championing this, saying, well, basically, all the crime is, and any police officer knows this, the primary crime is in people of color neighborhoods. Why? Because people of color neighborhoods are redlined, and there's less economic opportunity there, sometimes none. And there's virtually zero development. On our numbers, man, we'll have some questioning from some of the African American representatives on community development banks and how part of that historic redlining there, and this is some of the Fed's responsibility. Chairman Powell ducked it. So these are some of the issues that these people need to talk about and how they're going to deal with it. Now, Bloomberg has his Greenwood initiative there, and he's talked about, what to do in terms of development. Well, when we talk about development, we're talking about sustainable development, where neighborhoods get development, not just an emphasis on what we're going to create 100 jobs over here, because those jobs could come and those jobs could go. So when we talk about sustainable development, such as one they're doing, where was this? In the Mideast area there, using old discarded mattresses, the foam from it, to grow hydraulic tomatoes and plants, hydro plants. Their water plants and those kind of things, using cans and that technology. So those are some of the things they should be talking about here. Now back to the LA Times. Sorry to deviate off there. The immediate challenge of Amy Klobuchar in Nevada, who this is on, requires a big investment in organization clout to get out to vote. Well, she's got some more money, but it does take a while to do that when she's going to make her presence known. But in terms of the moderate lane, Buttigieg has been working on it for some time. That's according to Rebecca Katz, a former aide to Nevada's Harry Reid. Still, Katz warned it's a wacky race and hard to predict. Amy Klobuchar must be taken seriously, and she said after going from a poor fifth in Iowa, next door to Minnesota, winning double the vote in New Hampshire, all the Democrats who finished behind her. No doubt about that, but you're still going to need some organization there. I don't know where Harry Reid is on this. He's got his hand in all these little pies. We're a president who thinks everything is about him, his tweets, his golf course, his ego, etc. She's speaking directly to the camera. I'll be the President Commander-in-Chief who restores decency to the White House and gets things done. But she must organize to do it in a small period of time, with interviews even before New Hampshire's results. She had been grilled about her, well, we already talked about that, the African-American teenager. Now, another video speaking in support of a U.S.-Mexican border. That was in 2006 during her first Senate campaign and building her Operation Nevada beyond and beyond. Klobuchar is counting on the kind of fundraising boost there. According to her campaign, she raised $4 million since Friday after the Democratic debate, for which she's widely praised. Another 2.5 in hours after the polls in a New Hampshire closing. She's going to need every bit of it. And she has $5 million on. Had just $5 million cash on hand when the year began. So that especially there, but Buttigieg is getting money too. In Nevada, for example, Sanders has the most impressive ground operation. His campaign has more than 250 staffers, 11 offices. Mayor Petey has 100 people, and by contrast hopes to have a staff of, this is Amy, of 50 people in the coming days. She'd better have 50 people. She needs more than that. Votes in Nevada and in South Carolina. This is on the 3rd of and on March 3rd, they're going to say, well, etc. here. Post-election party in New Hampshire, she noted that she had been outspent. There's no doubt about that. She's going to be outspent. That she can count on, period. Now let's see if we can go to some actual polling here. We can go to some polling, because what I want to do here is illustrate actually what happened here with some of these polls, but we'll go and we'll start here with some of the present polls. Very interesting here. Now this the High Point poll, I guess we'll go ahead and do. This is North Carolina. This has Joe Lunchbox Biden up by 4, then Bernie at 20, has Bloomberg at 16, Warren at 11, Little Petey at 8, and Amy at 3. And the Economist poll has Bernie leading by 22, and Biden is at 18, decent number there. Bloomberg at 12, Warren ahead of him at 15, Buttigieg at 10, and Amy Klobuchar. This is a national poll. The Economist, YouGov here, and some approval ratings. The only reason we're going into this, and I think this is not the right one, the Ipsos poll here, let's see, at 44, this is DJ Trump, and he's at 43 in the Morning Consult. And let's see, anybody else that's honest here is at 45 in YouGov. We look at these very, very closely. Some things out of Alabama put DJ Trump, Mason-Dixon poll way ahead. He's at 60 to 37 over Bernie, the same over Mayor Petey, 58 to 37. And 54 to 40 over Bloomberg, up by 14 points in Bama. This is early in the ball game. 20 points ahead of Joe Biden is in Bama. And 27 ahead of Liz Warren in Bama also. Sessions, this is Beauregard Sessions. He's up by 2 over Tuberville. And what more is at 5 here? Yeah. And Sessions at 54 to 41 over Jones, Doug Jones. He's up by 13. Tuberville's up by 8. And Byrne is up by 9. Jones. This is Alabama Daily News and Mason-Dixon polling. Let me just move along here a little bit. I think we'll save the baseball setup for tomorrow night. Here, the week that was. At times when you get the wrong polls up here. I thought we had, not have. Got to get to the Washington Post. We have DJ Dion somewhere. Well, okay, somewhere here is Clutchy. Incidentally filed for bankruptcy. Very large newspaper. I think we'll throw it in. They, in Chapter 11, a major reorganization there, Incidentally, they bought Knight Ridder at one time, and McClatchy, of course, the Sacramento Bee has 30 newspapers afloat, has a debt of reorganizing more than $700 million in debt, 60% of which would be eliminated on the plan. And Chatham Asset Management is its largest creditor. Their 163-year-old McClatchy family still owns a lot of it. And about 20% of all U.S. newspapers closed since 2004. And they've shedded, that sector shedded 47% of its jobs. This is one reason we wanted to bring this in here. Now, the publishers, and unfortunately, the Miami Herald, Kansas City Star, a vulnerable newspaper there, which now went to a paid format only, so we don't get our news from Kansas City anymore. Our regional dailies saddled with debt since the 4.5 takeover, much bigger. This is Knight Ridder in 2006 has not helped them. Combination coincides with the digital boom that disrupted prevailing business model. Those ads up there, they've been long gone. In 2010, total revenue for print ads fell below 1950 levels and continues to decline. That's from Perry Abernathy, Knight Chair of Journalism and Digital Media Economics, University of North Carolina. Everyone assumes if you could make the transition over to digital, that things would be okay. But the problem is that in 2015, Google and Facebook made up 75% of the digital ad dollar in the U.S. markets. That's enough to sustain the news run. Was not enough, excuse me. McClatchy inherited from Knight Ridder. The move came shortly after McClatchy suspended some pension payments, announced it had hired a bankruptcy administrator to help it secure a government takeover of its retirement plan. In November, it said it was unable to make the required $124 million payment to the fund, which as of March 2019 was underfunded by $535 million. McClatchy's plan provides a resolution of legacy debt and pension obligations they should not be able to get out of it, which maximizes outcomes for customers and our other stakeholders. While local news suffered in the face of industry challenges, communities suffer, polarization grows as civic connections fray, borrowing costs rises for local governments. Hints of trouble began to emerge in the turn of the century. Circulation totals and share prices began slipping from their peak 1990s. McClatchy weathered early storms better than most. By the end of 2004, a long time ago, the company had notched 20 consecutive years of circulation growth. Its share price was the industry's top gainer for 10 years in a row. It was not immune from the Great Recession, which we call Depression, and other challenges of digital age, tsunami they call it, that powered the rise of Google and Facebook. Newspapers nationwide floundered, struggling in new paths of profitability. Some did make it, and relentless cost cutting ensured nearly half of the sector's workforce ensued from 71,000 in 2008 to 38,000 in 2018. That's according to Pew. Consolidation became rampant. Closures increased common. Today, there are 225 counties across the country without a newspaper. That's according to Abernathy's research. Half of all U.S. counties, more than 1,520, have just one, and usually a weekly. The nation remaining 7,200 newspapers, at least 1,000 are ghost papers, meaning they have been so hobbled by cutbacks that they produce little original reporting. That's again according to PEN America. What you're seeing is a consolidation occurring among major chains. that own all the dailies is not only a lack of coverage of the region, but the diminishing the very vital investigative analytical reporting that looks at the problem at the local level. Now, that's one thing the Washington Post has done. They have got a lot into national reporting. Despite the statistics, the sector grim trajectory has gone largely unnoticed by the public. Another Pew survey found that 71% of U.S. adults think their local outlets are doing well financially, and just 14% have directly paid a local news source, although subscriptions have been critical to the outlets. Survival in the era of dwindling ad revenue. Researchers lack the lack of strong subscription base limits the newspaper's ability to cover the basics: local government, schools, law enforcement, etc. And these hedge funds in here, Alden Capital has made a business out of buying struggling newspapers, slashing staffs to maximize profits and take advantage of the outlet's most valuable assets, their real estate. In other words, tear down the office. Alden's owns the nation's second largest newspaper chain, Direct First Media, which has overseen a drastic cost cutting at 100 daily papers, causing 1,000 job losses. Alden disclosed that it has a series of affiliate real estate companies whose businesses focus on the efficient buying, selling, leasing, and redevelopment of newspaper offices and printing plants. Nonprofits such as Knight Foundation have worked feverishly to help local newspapers. They've committed $300 million to help revive investigative and accountability reporting. That's the Knight Foundation. But they can't do it all. McClatchy set its sights on Knight Ridder. It leaped at the opportunity to ensure its national footprint. And, it now has the Miami Herald, the Charlotte Observer. Remember that back in the days when the late, great Jeannie Lyle was still alive. And known for its rigorous, that was during the O.J. Simpson trial afterwards, investigative reporting, bold storyteller. Knight Ridder had 32 papers with 84 Pulitzer prizes amongst them, and was proper, but it still was grappling with declining circulation and revenue. Bruce Sherman was one of Knight Ridder's largest stockholders, public campaign for sale, but the company attracted just one bidder, McClatchy. Anyway, McClatchy got the newspaper, drove it into the ground, and here's Greg Pruitt, Chief Executive, Associated Press, and the McClatchy CEO engineered the Knight Ridder deal, declined to comment. That tells you now the Associated Press where they're going. Soon after the sale closed, McClatchy sold dozens of its newly acquired newspapers: the San Jose Mercury, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Akron Beacon Journal. 9 of these papers were union shops, according to News Review. And we are here at WBRN constantly working on this. And the Washington Post, the New York Times doubled down on national and international operations that brought outside traffic outside their cities. You can make money with wide digital traffic. McClatchy had the same ability with national and foreign bureaus for 30 papers, and the Washington Bureau was the finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Won there. The Post and Times did. McClatchy didn't. They didn't have a forward vision at all. McClatchy had been in talks with the infamous Tribune Company about a merger. Fell apart in 2018. The sticking point was debt, despite the fact that the company had funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into erasing what it incurred with Knight Ridder deal. Tribune oversees several newspapers: the Chicago Tribune, Baltimore Sun, Orlando Sentinel, and Norfolk, the Virginia Pilot. We've used them before. And the Alden Global Capital now holds a 32% stake in the Tribune. McClatchy reported a net loss of $305 million on $7 million income, the majority of which was from massive markdown of its assets. As of September, the company's outstanding debt stood at $708.5 million. There's signs of growth. The company is seeking a 45% jump in its digital-only subscriptions in the past year. It is guided through the bankruptcy process by its largest creditor, that's Chatham Assets Management, a private hedge fund which owns 20% of McClatchy stock outside of the family. So, they also threatened with being delisted from the New York Stock Exchange because of its poultry share at 42 cents. So I guess you could buy it and perhaps make some money off of it. You'd have something to make. Anyway, that is that, and this will do it for Friday Java on the 14th of February 2020, Valentine's Day. And we'll have that open source report, and we'll be talking about some of these dodgy applications here. Let's see, who is this? Oh, yeah. I was looking at one of these, but we already have this, I believe. I think this is High Point. Yeah, High Point University Research Survey. This was in North Carolina, and we already talked about it, so we won't go back over it. But it effectively had 1,100 adults in it, and it was taken the 31st to the 6th of February. A little old now. But you're not going to get, usually PPP, we get them out of North Carolina. Usually they're the ones that come out of North Carolina. And let me just check back to the LA Times here. This is on Bernie Sanders. We'll bring this in. Bernie Sanders dominates Democrats in donations from tech workers, dissatisfied tech workers, no doubt about that. But like Bernie, and yeah, Bernie raised more money in 2019 from workers of 5 large tech companies, which happen to be the 5 most valuable companies in America. Period. That's from Alphabet, who is Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft. That's according to the Federal Election Commission. And his lead is growing with a gap of his nearest rival, Elizabeth Warren, which is Little Petey achieved a solid 3rd place, followed by Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, of course, in the business, and after finishing in 8th place in New Hampshire. And Amy Klobuchar, Joe Biden got less money from the tech companies there. Donations accelerate at the end of the year is what they say here. And yeah, drew significantly more support from Amazon's warehouse and fulfillment workers and drivers. That was to be expected because he took the cause of Amazon workers and the $15 raise that they were able to get, period, there. And several of those workers donated to Sanders' campaign. One supported Yang, another, and so forth and so on there. And the rest of these characters were just in the hunt, separate, including warehouse and technical workers, added to the share of how they felt about Amazon. Anyway, Bernie continues to burn, and of course, when you get to the west where these workers are, then you actually get to a situation where workers are there to help organize Bernie's campaign. So you look forward to that. That is one of the places that Amy Klobuchar has to do much better amongst tech workers. Hard situation. But one thing to remember about this entire presidential gamut, it's a long gamut, and until the super primary, we really don't know where this is going. It could go anywhere. Bloomberg has an advantage because he has money to buy TV ads, but will that propel the 5'4" former mayor, as DJ Trump called him? Well, he's shown he can go toe-to-toe on Twitter with DJ Trump. So some of these candidates are going to have to move in that way, but it's a long ways from now to the summer until after March 3rd. Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the week that was. We'll do an open source report, a numbers man report, and we'll return with the Monday morning quarterback. Good day.